In this exercise, you're going to be learning again lots of new techniques. You're going to create a yoke this time. Now, the previous yoke that you created, it actually was located close to the neckline. On this one, we're going to set the actual edge of the garment further out onto the shoulder, which is much more attractive. And we're dropping it down from the centre back neck also to make it much more attractive. And we're dropping it down at the centre front as well. This garment has got 4 little tucks on either side of the bust to create shaping for the bust. And you're going to do dart manipulation on this one once, then you're going to do it again. So you're going to see how it works. This exercise is on page 90 in the 6th edition of Metric Pattern Cutting by Winifred Aldridge. Right, the first thing you've got to do here again is I want you to mark around your bodice patterns. We're using the standard bodice block. So I have marked around this already, and this garment is also loose fitting. If I bring in the book again, here you'll be able to see that this garment is loose fitting. There's no darts suppressing it into the waist. So we're not going to use the waist darts here on the bodice. So what I've done, I've marked around the bodice, and I have not marked in the waist darts, but I've marked in the bust dart going into the shoulder and the shoulder blade dart going into the back. Again, this garment is quite straight across the bottom, so I'm just literally taking my meter stick and drawing across. Now, again, I'm using big, very thick, ugly felt tip pens so that you can actually see this. But please don't think that you should be using this. I want you to use an HB pencil. Right, again, this garment, as I said previously, it's loose fitting, so we don't need to suppress it in at the side seams. I'm dropping a line from the underarm here, dropping it down to what is the new hemline. Now the straight hemline I'm just marking in here in black so that you're not confused. So again, I'm using my big thick felt tip Sharpies, and my side seam line I'm marking in black as well. Okay, so the next thing I've got to do is cut out the back and the front. So I'm just going to get my scissors and very quickly cut it out. Once again, guys, I've marked centre front and centre back, and it's always vital that you know where these locations are on your pattern. So I'm very quickly cutting it. Now I've cut out the pieces, the front and the back, and as you can see the side seams are completely straight, they're not suppressed into the waist. Now I'm going to start off working in the back. So I'm looking at the back of this little garment here, and it's got a yoke at the back. So I'm going to create the pattern for that now, or I'm going to create the first bit of the pattern for that now. And what I'm doing is I'm actually going to take my French curve here, or my pattern master. It's vital that that goes through the bottom of the dart. So I'm going to first of all work out how far down at the back I want the yoke to drop down from the shoulder seam. So it's entirely up to you. You try and do it in proportion with the drawing. But I'm going to have mine dropping down approximately that amount. I'm not quite sure what that is. Let's measure it. It's approximately 4 centimetres. So I'm drawing a lovely curved line running through the bottom of that shoulder blade dart. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to cut along the line here of the yoke, and clearly there's not a dart here in this diagram, so I'm going to close the dart, so I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm going to move that out of the way. That pattern is complete apart from the fact it needs seam allowances and it needs to be labelled. So what I'm doing here is cutting out the dart. Okay, that goes straight into the bin. Now let's get that up the right way. And I'm closing, my dart was like that. I'm now closing it over and I'm taping it with a bit of tape. You see? So what we've done, we have moved the suppression that we were getting with that shoulder dart now into the seam. Now what I need to do here is add balance notches. It's easier doing it at this stage where I'm laying my patterns together like that. I haven't got seams on them at the moment, so I'm just going to randomly put a little line there which will end up becoming my balance notch on the two patterns, and the same here. Just putting it in. So I've now got my balance notches. So I literally can notch these at this point. So we know that that's going to help me with the sewing process. So I'm notching that. My notchers have got really blunt. They're not cutting through the paper as well as what they should. So whenever I'm sewing that, you see the two notches are completely matching here. Now I'm going to leave that aside at the moment because this section of the pattern is complete. This section of the yoke is not, because what we need to do is move this neck point back and this centre back neck section down to create a more interesting shape, like the square shape that you have here on the back of the diagram. Now, I'm going to move those out of the way, and I'm now going to start working on the front. It's a tad more complicated. Now, what we've got to do this time, it's almost like a two-step dart manipulation exercise. So what I'm doing here, I'm taking the big shoulder dart, the big ugly dart which we hate, and I'm going to move it into the side seam. Now you know how to do that. You literally mark where you want to put the dart. Now I'm putting it sort of midway down the side seam. It doesn't really matter where it's going, approximately midway. So what I'm doing now, I'm getting rid of the dart, this ugly big dart. That dart inlay goes straight into the bin. So what I do now, as you know, I cut along where I'm putting my new dart. Okay, so there it is there. And now what I'm doing is I'm closing it over. So I'm getting rid of my big dart, closing over. I'm putting it there in the meantime, but I'm going to move it again in another couple of minutes. So I'm putting down my little weights to hold my patterns in position. So that's my dart all taped up. So now I'm going to create the yoke in the front. So I want the yoke in the front to be roughly in the same position as what it is in the back. So I'm going to bring across my little back yoke here. I'm going to make a little mark. So it's approximately 4 centimetres down. Now it's entirely up to you as the designer to work out how far down from the centre front neck you want that little V to be. It's entirely up to you as a designer. So I'm going to approximately drop it down to, let me see, approximately 6 centimetres, which is a nice step. So what I'm doing now is I'm drawing the line in for the yoke. I've just made it about 7 centimetres. And it's a diagonal line again, like that. Now this is the interesting bit. That's my yoke seam. So I'm going to cut that. Move it out of the way for the minute. What I'm doing here, I'm closing up this dart. I'm going to open it back up there again. And what that's going to do is going to give me extra fullness for these tiny little tucks that we're going to put in. They're like little knife pleats, but we call them tucks because they're little tiny small little pleats. So what I'm doing here is, first of all, I'm drawing a straight line down like that. Now I'm using my black pen. Okay. So here we go. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting down. Just, as you know, I've just taped this up. And now I've got my extra fullness in here for the tucks. Well, you know something, that's not going to give me a lot of tucks. Let me just see how much I've got. I've just got 4 centimetres, and we want, well, 3.5 centimetres. We want really 4 nice big juicy tucks, or small little tucks, but you know, we want to have something that you can actually physically fold. So to give me extra fullness, what I'm doing here, I'm cutting along this black line, and to give me that extra fullness, I'm splitting the pattern open. So move that out of the way, move that out of the way, take that, and I'm going to get another piece of paper here, and I'm going to now tape this down. Now if I had some Pritt stick or paper glue, I could glue it down, but I don't have any of those, so I'm just going to use tape. So let's say I haven't got sufficient in here to create fairly substantial tucks. So I'm going to separate the pattern ever so slightly. I'm going to separate it actually probably about 3 centimetres. So I'm using my spot and cross paper, because remember that's the lines on the paper really. Those are they make up your straight lines. So it's approximately 3 centimetres. So that'll give me, what that's given me at the top now is, oh, maybe a wee bit more. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to separate it a little bit further actually, so that I've got approximately 8 centimetres for my, a wee bit more. I'm going to separate it so I've got my little, each one of my tucks is going to fold in 2 centimetres. Yeah, that's dead on. So I've got, that gap now is 8 centimetres, so that's given me enough to fold in nice, healthy looking, juicy looking tucks. Okay, right, so I've taped that down, and I'm using my black pen again to just mark across the bottom. Like that. And I am now using my French curve, because, you know, obviously these 2 points are not meeting and they're all at different heights. So I'm using my French curve, and I'm creating literally a nice curved line. Maybe have to take off a little tip of the top here of this pattern. So I've got a nice smooth line. So I've now got enough fabric in there to create my 4 tucks. Now, we need to indicate here on our yoke pattern where the tucks are going to be located. So I've got 4 of them. So I'm going to move this out of the way. I want those, I've got my yoke here, and I want the 4 tucks to be located somewhere in the centre of the yoke. So I've got, I'm going to sort of position the tucks, I think, approximately in this area, so it's going to go across over the bust. So I'm just going to make my first mark where my first tuck's going to be, and I think I'll have them 2 centimetres apart. So I'm putting in the notches here for the tucks. In fact, I'm going to do it with my pattern master so that you can see it better. So I'm just measuring, put in the first tuck. I'm going to locate it, it's going to sew on to the yoke at that point there. And I'm going to have the tucks, every one of them 2 centimetres apart. So there you go, I've got my 4 tucks in position. That looks okay. So I'm going to notch those. We're all good to go with those. Now, there you go. So now we've got to indicate where the pleats are and this lower bit of the bodice. Otherwise I wouldn't know where to fold the little tucks or pleats in position. So what I'm doing here, I'm taking and my yoke pattern and I'm marking it here onto my, here. Can you see? So we know that that's the beginning of the first tuck, and it's going to sew, whenever it's folded, it's going to align, the fold edge is going to align with that notch. Now, I'm going to take the last tuck and I'm going to just double check how much material extra I've got in here to fold. So, and that will determine what size of, how much I'm folding in the tuck. So once again, I'm taking my yoke and I'm marking it there. So I'm marking the little notch. So we know that we've got now this amount of material is 14 centimetres approximately, and here we've got 6 centimetres between the first and the last notch where the tucks are going to be folded. So what I'm doing here, I'm taking 6 away from 14. So how much is that? 8. So I've got 4 tucks. So we know we've got 8 extra centimetres of material. So if I divide 8 into 4, we know each tuck is 2 centimetres. So I'm now just going to mark in. There's my first tuck location. There's the notch. That's matching up beautifully. Now my next tuck. There we go. So I'm just going to make it a little fine pen and mark these, give them all numbers. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now you'll see how this works in a moment. So that notch is going to fall over onto that notch. So that's going to be tuck 1, and that's going to match up there. So that's the gap in between. And now we're going to add in the folding material for the next tuck. So that's going to be the bit that folds over for the second tuck. So I'm putting in my, there we go. And I'm marking in my next 2 centimetres. And that's my next tuck. And then I'm marking in where the next notch is. And what I'm left with is 2 centimetres. So that's going to be, whenever I fold these over, in actual fact, can you see those numbers okay? So whenever I fold that over, the little fold on the tuck is going to match up with number 1 notch. That's going to match up with number 2. The folding here, number 3, is going to match up there, and this here is going to match up with number 4. Now, all well and good. Now this is the next complicated bit. because we've got to fold these tucks into position on the paper. Otherwise, I'm going to just cut along this centre front line. Otherwise, they'll not lie in line with. They'll not lie nice and smoothly whenever we go to fold them. If I was going to fold those tucks now, they'd be all really seriously higgledy-piggledy. So what we've got to do now is watch what I'm going to do. This is the complicated bit here. So, I want the folds and the tucks to go towards the side seam. So I'm folding first notch. In fact, there's too much paper there. I'm going to just get rid of some because it just ends up doing a real hindrance. So I'm leaving about, 3 centimetres here at the minute. So I'm folding that tuck over. Can you see it doesn't really fold properly? Can you see that? Because of the angle of the line. So what I'm doing now, I'm just going to put a little pin in it. I'm going to put a pin in it as if I'm sewing it. Okay. Right. I'm going to fold over the next little tuck, which is number 3. Folding over as if I'm sewing it. The same way as I showed you how to fold the inverted pleat in the last video. Okay. That's all higgledy-piggledy looking at the top now. We haven't got a nice run at the top edge of this yoke. It's all jaggy looking. So I'm folding over number 2, putting in another pin, and folding over number 3. Now, that top line looks a real mess, doesn't it? But we're going to sort that mess out in a little minute, but you see what I'm going to do. Can you see how big a mess it looks? So I'm taking I use my big red pen at this moment, the horrible big thick red pen. And I'm using the curvy section on my Pattern Master. And I'm drawing a line. So this means whenever I cut this out in material, and the pleats will all fold beautifully in line in a nice run. So if I cut across that now, take out my pins. Now this looks a bit fiddly, and it is fiddly, but you'll manage it. Oh. Sorry, that's just come out a little bit there. That's not stuck down well enough. Let me just stick it down properly. Right, can you see how jaggy it is at the top? Now that's the top edge of your pattern, and we now have to add on the seam allowances onto that. So clearly I've got to cut around the rest of the pattern here. Finish it off. Get rid of all the extra paper. And I've got my cut around the armhole here. So, right, can you see we've got this jaggy line? So whenever I fold my little tucks into position, okay, can you see I've got a nice straight line? And what's happening here, the fold lines are matching up with my little notches. Now what I've got to do, I've got to work out, I've got to tell somebody where to fold these, so we have to notch each one of the little tucks. That's number 3 I'm notching, 2, and finally number 1. Right, so that's the difficult bit done now. So really and truly my lower sections of the front and the back are now complete. All we've got to do now is add on seam allowances and label the patterns correctly. So I'm going to move those out of the way for the minute, and I'm now going to work on the back yoke and the front yoke. So always remember to label your pattern. CB means back And centre front means we're at the front. So let's go back and look at my diagram here. As I said previously, we're actually moving the neck point. Here's the neck point here on the pattern. We're moving it away from the neck. We're moving it out on the back and the front. We're actually, the centre back here of the pattern is not coming up here to the nape of the neck. We're moving it down. The centre front here is not up here on the neck, at the sort of hollow little bone in your neck. We're going to move it down. So I'm going to use my black pen, I think, for this. So I'm going to, work out. I'm going to work out how far I'm moving it out. Well, we're going to start off with the back. So I'm really want to move it move it out towards the shoulder end. I'm going to measure approximately 4 centimetres here, and that's the pen that doesn't write. So I'm just going to square down, and I'm going to work out how far I'm dropping it here. I'm dropping it down again, probably about 4 centimetres approximately, and I'm squaring across from the centre back. Okay. I'm going to make that at a little angle. I don't really particularly like that square shape, so I'm going to make a little angle on that. Okay. Right. So there we go. So now that has to join up with that. There's the 2 shoulder seams. So what I'm doing here, I'm making sure that joins up. And I want the depth of that little yoke section there, approximately 4 centimetres, or maybe perhaps. Let's see what we want to make it. Let's make it about 4. So I'm measuring here, and I'm marking in the line. Nice parallel line with the bottom of the yoke. And got my, now, so we'll have to cut these bits out. Okay, looking at the garment again, there's no opening at the front here, there's no zip or buttons, there's nothing at the back. So this garment has to go over the head. So we need to make sure that there's enough room in the neckline to allow it to go over the head. So I've cut out my little yokes here. Now that's half of each of the yokes, half of the back and half of the front. So we need approximately 65 centimetres in circumference to allow an adult to put their head through. So let me just measure this to make sure there's going to be enough space in this opening. Well, it's 72. That's going to pop over somebody's head, so that's going to be perfectly okay. So there's no, the back's all one and the front's all one. So I need to just add on seam allowances and label the pattern. So I've already done that basically. I've got these already cut out. So I've traced around the back, add 1 centimetre all around and make sure I mark on my balance notches. So whenever that's opened out, I've got the full back. I have traced around the little back yoke, got my balance notches in here, added 1 centimetre seam, but at the neckline I've added a 5mm seam for sewing basically, for sewing purposes. So never open that up. There you can see I've got the full back. Okay, so I'll just move those out of the way for the minute. I'm going to take, I've done exactly the same for the front. The front already, there's no seam in it. So I've added my centimetre all the way around. You can see my my jaggedy edge at the top of the little tucks, the way they fold. Got the pattern label, open it up, and I say I put on the grain line and labelled the patterns. We're cutting one of the back and one of the front, and on the yoke here, traced around it, placed it on the fold, so it open up, and I've got a full yoke pattern. Now, because these are full width patterns, we only need one of each of these. I want the little tucks to be nice and smooth whenever they're folded, so I'm not making it up in calico, because calico is really stiff, as you know. So I'm making up this little top in a voile fabric, and a nice cotton lightweight voile fabric. So I'll make it up, and the next time you see it, it's going to be on the mannequin. Okay, so here's the little top that I've just made the pattern for. You can see that we've got the little tucks, and they're all facing towards the side seam. Now, on the pattern, as you know, I made these tucks all 2 centimetres, the fold of them 2 centimetres, but they're really not significant enough. They're not creating enough drama on the garments. So what I would probably want to do if I was remaking this, I would make the folds and the tucks a lot bigger. But you can see we've got the necklines moved away from the neck point, and here at the centre front neck's moved away. It's much nicer neckline, and as you can see, it's really quite a dated style, and really not really contemporary fashion at all. But what you're doing in these exercises is learning the techniques of creating a yoke, manipulating darts, and creating little tucks or knife pleats. If I turn around the back, here you can see again the yoke at the back. Again, it's very plain, and it's not much design to that, and I would probably, if I was redoing that again, introduce some sort of tucks or fullness or gathers or something here. And again, you can see the neckline has moved away from the nape of the neck, and it's moved away from the neck point. So it's got really quite a nice neckline, and the voile fabric is working really well on this.